This is by far the hardest bike I ever had to review. Why, you may ask? Stay tuned and let's talk about it. As usual, I have a lot to say. So grab some coffee, sit down, and let's go. Roll the intro. What's up, everybody? This is your boy DC coming at you once again. This is a channel sponsored by my own damn wallet, brought to you by your engagement. So please support the channel by hitting the subscribe button, hit the like button if you like this video, and feel free to ask any questions down below in the comment section. I don't own any bike shop to sell you anything. I'm not chasing any advertiser money to save my dying magazine business. I am not some douchey influencer with an agenda to push anything your way. I am as a normal of a guy as can be. I might smoke you next week, but you might have smoked me last weekend in a group ride. Now, some bits in this review episode may be repeated from the first impression video that I'll link right here of this very bike that we will be talking about today. Over the last dozen years or so, I've had the privilege and pleasure to own and ride a ton of miles aboard the bikes listed right here. And the reason why I mention that is because that is the baseline that I would establish as when I compare the characteristics and personalities of the bike. It would be based upon my own experience from the bikes that I've actually owned and ridden up till this point. If not mistaken, this is my third Cannondale Evo. This particular one is Supersix Evo, not to be confused with the System 6 Evo, which is the all-aero affair. Now, along with my old Canyon Ultimate CFS LX, Cannondale Evo that I used to own, those two bikes had the most number of miles on the odometer under my ownership, even to this day. Now, the previous Evos that I've owned, I was heavily influenced by my very close riding friend of mine, Chris, who actually still to this day thinks that Cannondale makes the best bikes, and he's the proud owner of a Cannondale Evo himself still currently, and owns a CAD 9, which was the last made in USA aluminum CAD line of bikes. And even before that, he had another either Super 6 or System 6. Anyhow, long story short, he had a heavy influence on me, and I went out and acquired Evos at the time. And back then I was under the impression, also again influenced by my friends, that light was the name of the game. So in the lineup of Cannondale, what you're gonna have is their Synapse, which is their endurance and comfort oriented bike. You can get that in aluminum or carbon. You also have a CAD series of bikes, which would be your aluminum framed version. And CAD, for the number of years, for the longest time, was the de facto standard in all aluminum frame bikes were measured against. And then you come with the System 6, which is the all-aero affair of Cannondale, and then you come with the Supersix Evo. And then the Supersix Evo itself in the current lineup comes in regular normal version, then you have the high mod, which is what this is, and then their top dog, Lab 71. So the purpose of this build was not only for me to ride a hell out of this bike, also to rekindle my old memories of Cannondale Evos that I had 10 whatever years ago, but also mainly to pit this bike against a Specialized Tarmac SL8 and sort of do series of videos comparing the two head to head and see if there is discerning difference enough to identify if there is a better bike out of the two. Therefore, the build of this bike, if you've watched my Tarmac SL8 review video, which I will link right here, is identical for the most part. The frame set itself is a size 51, comes in at 870 grams, which is 10 grams lighter than Tarmac SL8. Now, this is a high mod version, and I want to share with you another story before I go deeper into this video. Is if you are shopping for this bike frame set, have this in the back of your mind, because this was a deal that was offered to me. So as I was shopping and trying to acquire the frame set for this, I of course inquired some dealers as well as for looking for used frames and whatever else. And then as I was trying to source this bar, the MOMO design integrated handlebar, there was a dealer that offered me the MOMO design handlebar. I think this is like brand new for $650 or some $600 or so. The dealer said, "We will give you the MOMO design handlebar for free of charge if I were to pick up the Lab 71 version of this frame," and they were offering the Lab 71 frame for 10% off. Meaning, I could have gotten the Lab 71 frame 10% off with the bar added for no additional charge. Now, I declined it because I still don't need a Lab 71 level of a bike, because I am not a pro racer. I don't need that kind of a luxury. But also at the same time, go Google Cannondale team bikes, EF Education last year, painted as a Lab 71, but they were actually high mod version of the frame set, just like what I'm showing you here. So I'll be the last one to go buy Lab 71 for a couple of different reasons. However, that all said, if you are dying to go get yourself a Lab 71 frame set, make sure you ask your dealer, hey, I know there's a room for negotiation here. So make sure you don't pay full asking price from the dealer. Continuing with the build, the bike is built with Shimano Ultegra Di2 12-speed. Now, my thoughts on why I don't ride anything Dura Ace is pretty well stated throughout all the videos in this channel, but basically I don't think I really need Dura Ace because I'm not a pro level sponsored rider, and you are really getting literally all the performance of Dura Ace in the package of Ultegra with maybe about 200 grams of additional weight. Now, with that said, I will be putting together a video, Ultegra versus 105, sometime in the near future. The bottom bracket is from a company called BB Infinite, BSA English Thread. What this bottom bracket is, which is a departure from Cannondale's traditional PF30, which a lot of you guys would love. My crankset is 5034, my cassette is 1134, and my left side crank arm is from Stages Power Meter, which, by the way, in my Tarmac SL8 video, somebody commented, hey, you zero resetting and calibrating, all that doesn't do anything to give you the power numbers. Accurate power numbers when you're comparing bike to bike, or blah 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 blah. What I forgot to mention there was, in addition to doing all that, I was actually swapping the left crank from this bike to Tarmac to make sure there was no misreading discrepancies from power meter crank to another power meter crank. My rotors, both the front and rear, are 160 mil. Now, depending on which wheel set I roll on, sometimes my rotors are Ultegra, sometimes my rotors are Dura Ace. Really, no performance difference whatsoever, not even a significant weight difference to even discuss. The wheel sets that I tested the Supersix Evo with are basically Shimano Dura Ace C variant. So sometimes I rolled on 3650 or 5060. In my humble opinion, really the Dura Ace wheels cannot be beaten in terms of performance and the dollars. I mean, they're not cheap wheels, but still. Now, I do have a wheels comparison video coming out that I'm pitting the Dura Ace wheels against the NV SES 4.5 as well as Zip 404 Firecrest. So if that's something of interest, make sure you subscribe. My saddle is Selle Italia Super Boost Flow Carbon, which has been my favorite for last about 1 year or so. All right, so now I'm gonna take you through the long and laborious bits on this integrated cockpit. So if that's not of interest, there is a timestamp marker down below in the description and you can skip forward, but I think you owe it to yourself to hear what I have to say about this integrated bar if you are in the market for this very bike. Right out of the gate, I am going to share with you, if you are going to get a Supersix Evo, do not, I cannot advise you to get the MOMO design Cannondale System Bar R1, I think they call it. Okay, so what is wrong with the bar? Now, I'm gonna start with the good stuff first. So the bar is a all integrated affair, looks absolutely slick, especially on the top surface of the handlebar. They have this sheet of carbon that matches the decoration that they have on the top of the top tube, which is like a carbon weave or marble-esque kind of a finish. The regulars of this channel would know that I prefer aero handlebars for reasons that's actually not because of aero. I don't look for aero gains. I'm not that fast. But the reason why I prefer the aero shaped handlebar is because I love having a lot of a flat top surface on the handlebar. I find even ergonomic handlebars that are a little bit more traditional round tube shape to not actually be that comfortable. Whereas the flat bars, I really like my hand position where my palms have plenty of surface to land on, as well as very rare moments when I do the puppy paw thing The flat top surface allows more stable platform for you to rest on. The handlebar itself right now, the one that I'm running is a 100 mil stem with a 38 centimeter at the hoods, and they do flare out 2 centimeters at the drops. Cannondale also includes the out front computer mount that sits very well with the bar when it's all put together. Overall, aesthetically at least, the bar is very well designed. It's pleasing to look at, and that's about it. So what is so bad about this bar? Number one problem with this bar is that it's way too flexy. Obviously, it's hard to quantify how flexible it is because what I construed as flexible may not be flexible to you, and the other way around. And then what I'm trying to share with you is, out of all the handlebars that I've come across over the last how many years, I don't know, China, American, Italian, aluminum, carbon, whatever. This is by far, out of all the ones that I've had the pleasure of grabbing, this is the most flexible handlebar. Especially in the drops as you are riding, you will notice the significant flex the bar has. Now, keep this in mind. I'm in my 50s. My shoulder has been frozen for the last 10 years. I can't lift my right arm anything above this level. I have decorvains tendonitis on my right thumb and right wrist. I really can't grab anything or lift anything. You might have actually even seen me with a heavy bandaged hand as I ride. Why am I telling you this? I'm really nothing to speak of when we're talking about upper body strength. I have none. And then I'm a cyclist. So with that in mind, even a weakling like I am, I could make this bar flex with no difficulty at all. So obviously integrated handlebar, a lot of people love to hate, hate to love, whatever it is. So all the cables are completely hidden. Bike gives you very clean, streamlined look, all is well. But fishing those cables through is always a bitch. Now, having said all that, when you are fishing your brake housing cable through this handlebar, where the cable needs to exit, which is by the hood. So if you peel the rubber hood cover, you see the cable exit, and then it goes into your lever, and you have to tighten that down with the olive and all that good junk. Anyhow, the way the cable has to exit, the hole is positioned so peculiarly. Making that cable exit there is just, I mean, it wasn't impossible, but it was plenty difficult enough where it should not have to be that difficult. Set aside from that, another problem with this bar. The handlebar and the edge that's pointing towards the rider, it's basically a knife edge. Right as my palms are sitting on the handlebar, depending on the position, especially if I'm in that one position between the top and the hood where the 90-degree bend is, the bar will dig straight through the palm. I mean, it is very uncomfortable. Like today, I was out on a ride with a buddy of mine for about 75 miles. He was on a Factor Austro van, for what it's worth. Right at about 59 miles or so, I felt this pain right here as the bar just kept digging into my palm. So that's another knock on this bar. In terms of sizing, as I mentioned earlier, this frame is a size 51. Now, normally I prefer to ride bikes, road bikes anyways, with the stack of anywhere from about 520 to 525 and the reach of anywhere from about 380 to 385. This size 51 frame comes in with the stack of 525 and then the reach of 378 with the wheelbase of 996. So that means my cockpit is actually situated slightly higher, and the head tube is actually a little longer than my Tarmac SL8. So the position on the bike is slightly more relaxed when you consider that this is a full-on pro level race bike. And then on top of that, the wheelbase is full 2 centimeters longer than the Tarmac SL8 at 996 with the size 51. So this, you might think this handles slightly lazier, but I'm not necessarily noticing that on the road. With that said, in comparison, just to give you some context, my Tarmac sizing is 52, my Factor was 52, my Pinarello was 51.5. If on a giant bike, I would ride small. If I'm on a Canyon bike, I would ride extra small because their sizing runs large. And then my Orbea Orca was 51, my BMC was also 51. As you can see, my bike is very stealthy, all black affair. They do make other colorful variations of this frame set, but at the time when I was looking for this frame set to build on, this was the only thing available, so here it is. Now, make no mistake about it, black is my favorite color, but in terms, when it comes to bikes, I actually try to avoid black bikes because when you show up on a group ride, I mean, out of 10 guys, inevitably 6 guys are gonna be black bikes, maybe 5 of those guys on black matte frame set. This one, however, as you look closely, it has glossy paint job on the front, which fades into matte finish as you go to the rear of the bike. Obviously, whether I like it or not, it gives you very stealthy, streamlined, clean, sophisticated appearance. When it comes to tubing, this bike has some things that we should talk about. So the head tube is very svelte, very thin, very pointy if you look at it from head on. It doesn't have any of that speed sniffer thing, like any sort of a weird shaping to the head tube. More or less, it has a little bit more traditional way of being aero, which is kind of a wedgy shape as the head tube is introduced to the wind that's coming at you. And then the down tube is reasonably chunky with very pronounced camtail truncated foil shape. The top tube has some shaping to it where the top surface of the top tube is reasonably flat, which then towards the bottom of the top tube it's kind of a D shape. And then the C tube is unapologetically camtail aero affair, and then that camtail and whole aero bit transitions over to the seat post. The seat stays are extremely dropped, for one being aero and two give you more compliance. The seat post is basically proprietary aero affair, and it has this little notch right under where the saddle would be, which I actually don't know whether that's there to accommodate the seat bag or if it's kind of cut out like that to introduce more compliance. In terms of if it was for the seat bag, it does its job very well. As to whether it adds compliance or not, we will come back to that point in the next section, in the ride section of this review. The tube shaping, basically, I must say, it's purposeful and it's beautifully executed if you ask me. There is no weirdness like the to be more aero, they didn't put any sort of a aero deflector up here. There's no speed sniffer, that kind of thing. It's just very classic looking with all the modern way of building designing a bike. So your tube shapes it's actually got more aero flavoring than you would think. Now, you wouldn't see this looking at the bike from the outside, but the bike comes with what they call Delta Steerer, which this is actually a bit of a steer tube that's been cut to slam my cockpit. And if you look at it, the shape of it is basically as so. It's not your traditional typical round steer tube. So they did this to allow the brake cable housing on either side of the steer tube to have a ample space to go down the head tube. Now, as far as I'm concerned, up till now, I haven't noticed any ill effect from the steer tube being in this shape. The bottom bracket area looks pretty modest in terms of a modern bike. It's not overly oversized. Overall, the bike looks to me pretty streamlined and clean. As my British friends might say, also, bike looks smart. To round out the design and aesthetics, the tire clearance wise, I am running 29 mil NV tires, NV SES tires, which balloon up to about 30. So front and back, there's enough gap, I think, to allow 32 mil tires, but at this point, anything over 28, 30, maybe a bit counterintuitive, so I'm not sure if I would recommend that. Let's talk about how it rides, which is why I tuned in from the first place. Just to give you a little bit of context to how I sort of get a feel for a bike, kind of how to read a bike. I ride without my head unit visible to me. I either would blank out the screen or I would have my Hammerhead Karoo in my back pocket, so I'm not looking at the screen, because as I'm trying to read a bike, I don't want watt numbers or speed numbers to kind of give me sway my opinion one way or another. I don't want the numbers to influence how I'm reading the bike. So I basically ride along with my perceived speed of where I should be, I think, and then I compare the numbers after the fact to see how the bike fared. My build here is actually pretty dang similar to how Cannondale would spec out for one of their stock bikes that they sell to the dealers, minus the Dura Ace wheels versus Cannondale's hologram wheels that would come with the bike if you were to buy one from the store. So everything that I share with you right now, take it with a grain of salt. Because Cannondale positions this bike as a light all-around race kind of a bike, where they have the System 6 as their full-on aero rig, you may think this is just a light climber, and you may not be wrong, because when you see EF Education boys during the tour, when they're tackling Vaughn 2, you're gonna see them on Supersix Evo. That said, the bike features plenty of aero features to. So that said, in today's bike design, even the light climbing bikes, they would have aero features added to the design. This bike, no exception. As mentioned earlier, your head tube is very aero. Your fork has very thin profile looking at it from head on. Your seat post, it is pencil thin, and down tube with the cam tail, the C tube with the cam tail truncated foil, it's very aero. And the reason why I mention that is because, surprisingly, this bike does really great holding speed at high speed like a full-on aero bike. Now, somebody commented in my other video that all the bikes that I've had in the past are just non-aero bikes, so that therefore I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm comparing a bike to an aero bike. I don't know what the man was thinking, but I've been riding Ribble Ultra SLR for the last 15 months, and bike doesn't get any more aero than that thing. Plus, I've had 2.5 years, thousands of miles aboard Cervelo S3, which was one of my favorite bikes, and that thing's also very aero. So immediately, one of the things that I want to share with you with the characteristics of the bike that's especially more prevalent compared to some of the other bikes is that from zero to whatever, from the gun to speed, this bike probably by far the most impressive bike when you are just talking about zero, just a dead stop, to getting to the speed that you want to be at. So in the automotive world, you're kind of talking 0 to 60, with the 2.9 seconds, whatever it may be. So The bike is extremely quick from 0 to getting to the speed. So if you are in a race situation and you want to just attack right out of the gun and get to the breakaway, I can't come up with another bike that would be better suited than this very bike. And then once you get to that speed, as I mentioned earlier, this bike surprisingly does a great job holding that speed. Okay, so on the climbs, I came into this whole thing expecting this bike would behave just like my old Cannondale Evo high mods, because that bike was so light and was so poised, so great at climbing. I took that thing everywhere, California, up and down, west to east, south to north. Every mountain there, I tackled it with my friends. That said, I was expecting sort of the same thing with this bike. Now, make no mistake about it, it does not suck at climbing, but I can tell you it is anywhere near the prowess the old Cannondale Evo high mods that I had. It's not as confident on climbs as that. And then the most important aspect of riding to me, how does a bike handle over very long routes, long days on the saddle, long arduous days when I'm doing 100 miles, 10,000 feet, how does it handle? So this is kind of in the intro I mentioned to you how this bike has been so hard for me to read, because this bike is doing kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. It's an enigma of a bike. On one day I take it out, it's like, oh, it's riding top heavy, and why is it? And then on another day I go, I mean, it's still top heavy, but the bike feels great. I mean, so I can't seem to come with a definitive answer to this bike. Because no matter how you feel day to day, a bike is going to give you very consistent manners, consistent riding characteristics. A stiff bike is going to handle stiff. Aero bike is going to cut through aero. This bike, every day that I take it out, it handles differently, and I cannot figure out why that is. So on long days, as I mentioned earlier, the handlebar is extremely flexible. You may think, well, DC, so then it might give you a ton of compliance. You would think that. But I actually don't feel as the handlebar is giving me the compliance that I should be getting, especially when the stiffness is compromised. The rear. This seat post here, the pencil thin seat post, is very, very stiff, doesn't aid in anything in terms of providing compliance in the rear side. So any fantastic engineering and design that could have gone into the design of seat stays, how it's dropped, all the room for the seat post to flex back and forth, doesn't come into play. The seat post itself is so stiff. And that is compared to the aero seat post that I had on Soloist, aero seat post that I have on my Tarmac SL8. The seat post on the Tarmac is actually beefier than this, and yet it does a better job at providing compliance under your ass. As I mentioned in my first impression video, the bike rides top heavy. And I don't know how I can quantify that or explain that to you, because I'm surely not going to cut up the frame to look at the carbon layup like Jordan does. I love you, Jordan. But even considering the fact that the rider, the bulk of the weight as a system, you are up top, rider is up top. Therefore, every bike is going to be top heavy. However, this bike here especially, it is not unnoticeable. I noticed it immediately on my day one, on my first ride. The bike's balance is a little bit off. There's little to nothing on the bottom half, and there's just too much going on the top half. I hope that makes sense. As a system, bike and the rider itself, this is a very lively bike. I don't necessarily feel that disconnect that I had between me and Tarmac SL8. This bike you definitely work with the bike. Bike doesn't just go under you by itself. You are definitely making this thing work. You are definitely feeling every watt that you are putting down with this bike. Now, however, because the bike is doing this Jekyll and Hyde thing, like I mentioned earlier, some days it's like, you know what, I've read everything wrong up till now. And then the next day I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly right. So it's been very hard for me to make this video because I want to come on here because you trusted me enough to take your time to watch what little old me is putting out as a review video. You want to get some educated opinion, but as far as this bike is concerned, I just need to share with you and you're just gonna have to draw your own conclusion. The bike is not definitive. So what am I trying to say? In a perfect world, I would have loved to have maybe another month to put the bike through its pace, maybe another 500 miles or so on top of what I already have. I think, what have I written? 800 miles on this thing. So that might have given me more chance to get more definitive reading out of the bike, but that's kind of where I'm at with this thing. All right, so this is a new section that I started with my last episode. This is the would I rather or would you rather. This is a section where I compare would I take this bike or another bike compared to the bikes that I've had in the past. So when this channel was started, my bike at the time was a BMC Road Machine. So we're gonna go through chronological order and I'll tell you what my thoughts are between if I have to pick one out of the two. BMC Road Machine versus Supersix Evo. I will take the Supersix Evo because one, Road Machine is actually a endurance type of a machine because it has a very long wheelbase. It's not the team machine bike that that BMC makes that are for actual racing, whereas this frame set is being raced by the pros. So with that said, this thing having a long wheelbase, 996 for size 51 is very uncommon, but yet handling it actually snappy enough. So with that said, Road Machine had this fidgety front end where this does not, so I will take the Supersix Evo. Next bike, Orbea Orca versus Supersix Evo. This might be controversial, but I will take the Orbea Orca because there's a better value proposition with that bike. I had the OMR frame version of Orca, but if you were to have the OMX version of the Orca, and you might still actually come cheaper than this thing because this thing is very overpriced for what it is compared to what it's on the market. So that said, Orbea Orca is a fantastically riding bike. Doesn't have the weird balance issue that I'm finding with this thing, so Orbea Orca would be my pick. Against the Factor Austral VAM versus Supersix Evo. Earlier this week, Factor announced revised version of Factor Austral VAM. Now, I haven't written that obviously, so my thoughts here would be based on my previous gen. It's previous gen by 1 week, Austral VAM, and there it's actually an apple to apple in terms of overpriced bike versus overpriced bike. Now, don't get butthurt for those of you Cannondale fanboys and Factor fanboys. I'm just talking about if the bikes are equipped similarly compared to other bikes, that's what I'm talking about. However, pitted against the two, Austral VAM versus Supersix Evo, I would probably take the Austral VAM. Next up, Pinarello Prince versus Supersix Evo. Somewhat of an apple to an orange. Pinarello Prince is not the pro race bike. is heavier. It does not sold as a light kind of a, you know, race bike. It's more or less, I think it's going for a different market. So it's somewhat different, but I don't know which way I would swing there, because this is a lighter bike. This rides pretty well for what it's worth, but the price is also a little more attainable in terms of a cost. I would take Pinarello Prince against Ribble Ultra SLR. Now, Ribble Ultra SLR is 100% no apologies aero bike. It is about 2.5 pounds heavier than this bike. So we're really not comparing an apple to an apple. This does have some aero bits and actually does remarkably well when you put it in situations where you need to be aero. Like if you are just pulling this train up at the front where you're just hammering, putting the hammer down at the front of a pace line, or you are just gunning it in the breakaway to get away from your friends, you're dusting them in the back. So it does hold the speed well, and it's pretty aero for what it's worth. But against the Ribble Ultra SLR, I would take the Ribble Ultra SLR. Against the Cervelo Soloist, a lot of you probably want to know which way I would swing here. Now, Cervelo Soloist is one of my very favorite bikes for a lot of different things considered. When you compare the two bikes, there's already discrepancy of $1,800 from frame set to frame set when you buy brand new. Is this bike riding $1,800 better than Cervelo Soloist? No. Matter of fact, I would even say the Soloist rides better than this bike. So when you put on the same Shimano Ultegra Di2, when you got the same Shimano Dura-Ace wheels, remember I had them built exactly the same. So they are identical. And with that said, I would take the Cervelo Soloist any day, all day, and twice on Sunday against Supersix Evo. Against the Tarmac SL8, you will have to tune in for the next episode where I actually talk about this bike versus Tarmac SL8 head-to-head comparison. This episode is a review for this bike only, so I'll make that pick on that episode. Against the Trek Madone, and that is coming sometime soon. Against the Canyon Aero, that is coming sometime soon. So with that 1v1 comparison, you may think, oh my God, this guy really isn't liking the Supersix Evo. I could see why you may say that, and I'm not gonna sit here and tell you this is an inferior bike. It's not like Richard Carapaz and Nielsen Paulus are going any slower because they're riding the Supersix Evo when other guys are on their Specialized and the Pinarellos and Maritas and Giants and what have you. It's not that. It's just that you've heard me doing cost comparisons when I was picking. So I'm thinking in terms of how a bike rides as well as what it means for you to obtain one, because you're spending your hard-earned dollars to buy a bike. You're not being sponsored one. You're not being given a bike like the pro riders. So me thinking in terms of just regular consumer, regular bike enthusiast, I must think about the value proposition of the bike, how the bike rides. The bike rides fine. Even if it rides top heavy, you do get used to it. So when you think about the dollar, how expensive it is, that's where you kind of have to make your decision also based on that. To start the conclusion portion of this review, I will start off with the handlebar. This bike suffers because of this handlebar, and you can take that to bank. If you were to get this bike, I would recommend that you either go with the normal stem and handlebar combination, or if you want to get an integrated bar, go get a Vision Metron. Just like the EF Education boys do. I don't think they ride MOMO design bars. I think they ride the Vision Metron ACRs. So get that. I mean, I had the Vision Metron 5D on my Cervelo Soloist, and that thing is rock solid. Comfortable, stiff. It is what you want in a handlebar, not this. The bike looks extremely modern, if you ask me. It is very stealth fighter-like, but it also retains the classic bits that we would like. Doesn't have any ISO flow, cut decouplers, or aero deflectors, or any of that nonsense that normally misfire. This is a straight-up bike that a bike traditionalist can appreciate, while also appreciating all the modern engineering and thoughts and design cues that went into it. Despite the bike's ride characteristics being different, I'm not sure I would call this bike ride quality worse or better than other bikes out in the market. It just rides differently. You do get used to it, and that to me says the bike has its own unique personality, for better or worse. That's up to you to make the call. And then this is going to be an extremely personal statement. You may agree, you may disagree, but this is just my thoughts. You tuned in to hear my opinions, so I am going to share with you my opinion here. I am not sure if Cannondale did a great job passing the torch from the previous gen Evos to this Supersix Evo. The previous Evos that I had were absolute monster on climbs. Granted, it was a rim brake version. This thing's carrying hydraulics, the discs, the electronic shifting, and all that. So it's right out of the gate, it's like 2 pounds heavier than the previous Evo that I had. However, in terms of its overall characteristics, the personality, its overall quality, the rider feedback, it is just not quite there. So I cannot sit here and say and tell you that this is a new and improved version of the Evo that I'm personally fond of. To conclude, this is my parting shot. If you are going to get this bike, definitely go get different cockpit. If you're going to get this bike brand new, especially, then ask your dealer to make sure to hook you up with a good deal, because apparently, well, I mean, any bikes would have room to negotiate. It doesn't matter which bike it is. At a store, you know, they are working with a certain percentage of margins, and there is a room depending on who you talk to. So make sure, especially if you're getting lap 71 edition of this, because apparently there's plenty of a markup there to play with, because they were offering me 10% off and this thing for no additional charge, which unfortunately I declined. So that is my take. In its own right, this is a good looking bike with the aesthetic cues, like, I mean, even on the fork where the through axle adapter would go, on the right hand side, there is no hole. You don't see the through axle adapter come through. So, I mean, something like that to make it all nice and clean look. The integration, great, despite how hard it was to fish that brake housing cable. There are some things that were not executed perfectly, but to me this is a slightly overpriced bike. But if you love the way it looks, if it's gonna get you out on the road more, who am I to say? There is price to pay, and you know, a dollar to me is different than dollar to you, so who knows? So that is my take. I know I rambled on a lot here, and because I didn't have a definitive observation to whether to recommend this bike to you, to say this is a fantastic bike or this bike sucks, I couldn't come to that conclusion with this bike, because it's literally different every time I take it out, which is very rare. So that is my very long 2 cents. I've been Diabetic Cycling. You've been awesome. Keep the rubber side down. Be safe out there, folks. Until next time, DC out.